Hi, we're going to take a look at how to create reflectance on shiny surfaces. Take a look here on my screen. I've got an orange. You notice that the bottom of the orange, it has a clipping path that makes it look like it's actually behind this rim. This is supposed to be a silver plate. I've just used very basic linear gradients to give the illusion of reflecting the pink in the walls and down here reflecting the blue on the table. I created a copy of the orange, which I'm going to use in a few instances to create the illusion of reflections. Now, one way that we could do this right off the top is within the gradient panel, we could put slight bits of orange in there. Just going to move my gradient panel there. I can put in a color swatch, add in a tiny little bit of orange. This already is creating very subtle environmental cues about light bouncing off of this orange, hitting the bottom of the plate, and then bouncing back to the viewer's eyes. Even with simple gradients like this linear gradient, you can start to layer in atmospheric coloring that gives it a sense of being bound to the same physical reality as the orange. And that's essentially what you want to do. You want to create color schemes and reflections, shadows that are all consistent with one physical reality. So you'll notice the shading in the orange and the highlight in the orange is indicating that we have a strong light source coming from top right. Shadow and darker areas we'd expect to see down here, and you'll notice that I've made it consistent with that over here as well. This back edge would also probably pick up some environmental coloring as well. So I'm just going to click down on my swatch there and perhaps add in a little orange as well. So again, we're binding it to this physical reality of color. They're existing in the same space, and perhaps I'll do the same here. I'm just going to option drag a copy of this and just bring it over there, perhaps a little bit more over here, and it just gives us a sense, using linear gradients, that these elements are reflecting colors coming from the orange. We could take this a step further. We could use a masking technique with copies of the orange to create very crisp reflections. The first thing to ask yourself is, if you're the viewer and you're looking at this and light is coming in from top right, what surfaces will it bounce off of? Clearly, anything that hits the orange may bounce and hit here. It may bounce and hit somewhere down here and here. Even ambient light bouncing off the back wall, hitting the orange, could also hit this back surface of the bowl and bounce back to the viewer's eye. But most definitely, this outer lip would catch reflections of this orange as well. The edge of the plate, which we can see down here, could only pick up reflections of the table, likewise for this under area here. Now, if I had an orange sitting out on the table, that'd be another story. We would expect to see some color hitting here, but the faces of these implied surfaces are facing away from the orange. So there's no way that light could bounce and hit that. So just make sure, even if you're setting up very simple gradients, that it's physically plausible that light could bounce off your objects and reflect off of your shiny surfaces. I would fully expect to have a little bit of orange in here as well. So in my gradient panel, let me be consistent with that. I'm just going to add another color swatch, drop a little bit of orange into that. And again, you can see that it's crafting something that is logically consistent. But these are very diffuse. This is, if our surface on our plate were, say, brushed aluminum, we would expect to have a very diffuse and scattered light source reflected. However, I want to make or imply that this is a highly polished silver plate. So we need really hard-edged reflections. And I want this top section of the orange to reflect through here. It's as if the light hit here, then it bounced off of here and back to my eye. I'm going to rotate this so that it's here. However, I'm going to have to shift the color. And so in order to do that, I'm going to flip the object this way. So we're getting consistency in terms of reflection. I think that would work quite well. I'm now going to use masking. So for that, I'm going to make a copy of this outer edge, and I'm going to put the orange into position where I envision the reflection being. So I want to make sure that I'm just moving this straight down. There. Move the reflection into this area. And then what I want to do is, because of the way in which masking works, is I want to make sure that this ring is in front of the orange. So what I can do now is just use Command or Control on a PC and right bracket until this thing's in front. Then I can select that ring and also select the orange. I want to make sure I've got the entire thing. Let me just label this. I'm just going to call it mask. There's the reflected orange. The mask is in front of the selected orange. And so what I want to do now is select here using the target icon and hold the Shift key down and select the mask. So these two objects are selected, both the masking object and the object that we wish to be masked. Now that they're both selected, I can say Object, Clipping Mask, Make, or Command 7, Control 7 on a PC. And you can see here that it's generated those reflections, and I can just move that into position. Now, the problem is that we've got the orange reflected up here. We don't want that. We want this to be behind the orange, but we can't have it existing in two separate planes. So what I'm going to have to do, let's call this front reflection. And I just want to make sure I'm grabbing the entire thing. There. Call it front reflection. There we go. So with all of that selected, I can then move it. And what I need to do is essentially just cut this here and join it back up again. Delete the parts that I don't need. For that, I'm going to use the scissors tool, which is located under the eraser. I'm going to cut it here, also cut it over here. I can get rid of the parts that I don't need. Command Y allows me to go out of preview and into the wireframe mode, so I can see these back areas here. Cut it here, cut it here. I'm going to cut it here as well. There we go. So we've cut all of that, and I can get rid of the things that the parts that I don't need. There we go. Select here. Now, one thing we want to make sure of, you can see these little X's here. And those are called stray points. We need to get rid of those. The best way to get rid of stray points, because they can create problems for you, especially when you're doing masking. And if we just say, select object, stray points, it's going to select all of those stray points and we can delete them. Now what I want to do is just join these two up, this to hit Command J or Control J to join. Likewise, Just drag a marquee, Command or Control J. And now let's do Command Y to get back to preview mode. And you'll notice I have that little section, that front reflection, and we can move that up. Now, one thing about doing believable reflections is that there are discontinuities. It wouldn't make any sense that this would line up perfectly. Because of the spatial geometry and planes being on different axes, we wouldn't expect these things to line up perfectly. So creating discontinuities can be very helpful in terms of crafting reality. We expect to see these discontinuities in the real world. So I just moved that little section there. I'm now just going to select the reflection component, not the mask, just so I could scale that up just a little bit more. I'm going to distort it a little. So we still keep our discontinuity. I'm going to select the entire thing again and just move it into position. So you can see there's a very real discontinuity in the reflection right here. And that's fine. That's helping to signal to the viewer through that discontinuity that this is a different surface, closer to the top of the orange than the other surfaces on the plate. Another thing that I might do is also create some right in the mask itself, not on the mask, but the mask or clipping mask on the reflection. So this thing, I may cause some distortions in that. And I can just do that by adding some points. So I'll use the Add Anchor Point tool. Just click there. Just click a few points. Just so I can create some disturbances. These disturbances would naturally occur due to slight warps in the surface. There we go. And I'm just going to create those distortions just like that. And it looks like it's rippling. And that's all I'm doing. Just creating a little bit of a ripple in that surface. And like I said, that would be consistent with slight flaws in the surface of that plate. And maybe we'll do that here as well. So it's not entirely perfect, and which is fine. Again, we're just trying to create an illusion. And you can see the reflection there. Now, we'd also want to see something here as well. You can imagine that very diffuse light would hit the back wall, hit the back of the orange, then bounce back, hit this area here, and reflect back to us. So in this case, I'm going to make a copy. I probably should have had several copies of that orange. Just going to use this. Got it on another. And just bring this next orange in. And I'm going to use this piece as a mask. And remember, the back of the orange is going to be fairly dark. So what I'm going to do is expand this shadow area right here. And I'll just use my direct selection tool, select the areas of the shadow. Because remember, this is now the back of the orange. And we would fully expect to maybe see something like this on the back of the orange. I can remove some points. Just going to straighten that out. And that might be consistent with what we might expect on the back end of that orange. Now, chances are we're not going to see this stuff here. Certainly we wouldn't see this business up here in the mesh, because if you think about it, that top of the orange is facing away from that surface. So we would not see the pitting at the top. So I suppose I could just take my mesh and just recolorize some of the points in it. I just want it to sample the color, so I don't want it sampling the appearance, because the appearance actually has a Photoshop special effect applied to it. So under appearance, I just want the color, and then apply color. And so that's all but eliminated that business at the top. Probably we wouldn't have a strong highlight here, but I'm going to keep that in because it's important for generating that texture that we're seeing in the orange. So keep that. I'm just getting rid of that green, just so it's a little bit different. And now, again, I should make sure that I just take this straight down. And then I'll take this, throw it into an area consistent with that. I might even rotate it a little bit. Make sure the masking material is in front. Command right bracket. Then I can select both of these elements. Object, clipping mask, make. And so now I've got this section, which I can put in here. Now you'll notice that the orange, I need to move that over a little bit. So I'll just make sure. I'll call this dark reflection. I'll select the orange and just move it. Perhaps stretch it a little bit. And now I just have to make sure that it's layered correctly. And there it is behind. We're reflecting the reverse side of the orange, the front side of the orange. If I wish to create the illusion of slight perturbations in the surface of that dish, I can just add some anchor points in. So a reflection on the front, a reflection in the back, and we would do the same thing here as well. So I'm just going to bring that in. Command or Control V to bring my copy of the orange in. As a matter of fact, instead of having to recreate that, I can just make a copy of this orange right here. So that's our dark reflection. I can select it. Just select that orange right there. Just call it dark orange. Select that orange, copy it, come out here, and I'm going to use Command B. It'll just paste it behind this object. Just move it to about here, hold the Shift key down, select the object that I'm going to mask it with, and then Command or Control 7. Let me move that into play. I'm just going to move the outline into position. The problem is you can see the orange is in the wrong place. So I'm just going to select that. There's the orange. We'll call this back wall reflection. When you're getting these graphics that are becoming increasingly complex, so you've got masks within masks within masks, it becomes very important to make sure that you're properly naming the components of your file, structuring them appropriately into layers and sublayers so that they're easier to find the things when you need them. And I can now select that orange and I can move it over there. Now you'll notice I'm not lining it up exactly. The discontinuities are really important to sending that signal to the brain that this is a reflection. I'm even going to leave that little tiny slice there just to really emphasize the discontinuity. And now again, I can select that object. There's the orange and the clipping path of that orange. I can add more anchor points to. Then use my direct selection tool and just create those slight perturbations in the surface. There. So, Command 0, and that's how we generate reflections.